Yeah, that's cool. Do you want to do the intros, Martin? I know most people here
Absolutely.
already.
I'll
Yeah.
do this virtual Hollywood clap and say welcome to the Agile Strategy Meetup Group. My name is Morten Elvang. Today is a special summer extension because I realized that the Scrum Guide Extension Pack was coming out and there was a special section on strategy. And that gave me a chance to speak with you, John. So I'm really pleased that you accepted to be here today and tell more about what is that all about, and hopefully also including some of your own thoughts on strategy and agility. And we will follow the normal format, which is about 30 minutes for presentation,
Yeah.
30 minutes for conversation, and we will keep it to that hour. And with that, welcome and please.
Thank you very much. Carl, I know you already. How are you getting on? Is that Tatiana from Ukraine? I'm curious. I can't see with the cat, but I think that's your little emoji. I think I know everybody here, which is great. Oh no, I don't know Jens. MS, I don't know who MS is or Pascal. But I'm delighted you're here, and I'm going to talk to you about strategy today. I'm going to start off with a presentation, but it's very informal. So you can basically interrupt me at any time. Um, it's better if you ask me questions straight away. The presentation I'm going to show you is one that I actually gave last month at the Beyond Budgeting conference. And it doesn't entirely cover what we need to cover today. So it covers a little bit about strategy, and you'll notice there's something missing. And so then what we're going to do is we're going to flip over to the Scrum Guide Expansion Pack because there was some text written about strategy when that was released a few weeks ago. And it will be updated as well, of course. In September, it'll be updated regularly. And so any ideas that you have about making that piece better would be very, very welcome, actually. Um, so I'm going to start with the kind of more usual stuff that you kind of hear bandied about, and we'll just kind of make sure we're on the same page. And we'll kind of get into what's missing. Any questions at the moment on what we're here to talk about today?
Sounds very good.
Okay, cool. So it's funny. I'm involved in writing documents, and I realized actually that what this slide says isn't quite true, because you know when you say things all the time and then you write them down and you say, "Is that really true?" Because focus isn't just about what not to work on, but it's also what are you working on. You know, it's kind of implied, I guess. But a lot of people kind of assume that when we prioritize work and we put other work on a lower priority. I had this with a client in Chicago a few weeks ago. A lot of the stakeholders seem to think that the lower priority items are still happening. You know, that they're on the slow burn. You know, they think some magic is happening, and we're going to get those things as well. But actually, for really good our communications, we'd be saying these are the things we're doing right now. This is what we're thinking of doing next, but we haven't actually started it, and these are the things we're not actually starting. Being really clear about that is very important, and a lot of us kind of miss that trick, I think, including myself. Sometimes I forget to say it, you know. So, and there's lots of ways you can get focus. You're from different size organizations, I take it. And when we wrote the Scrum Guide Expansion Pack, we had to think about, well, what if you're a startup, and what if you don't have any managers? But what if you're in the Matrix Reloaded, you know, where nobody has any power to do anything? You know, so we have to think about all different kinds of contexts. But generally speaking, you would have some kind of far away picture that you're going after. The language that people use is quite confusing. People talk about mission and vision, and depending on who you ask, you know, they're the opposite of each other, and I got confused about that myself. Um, I will give Roger Martin credit for one thing. I know, Tom, you're not very happy with Roger Martin's work, but one thing I do like about what he's done is he's kind of given everyone a language, which is insufficient, by the way. We're going to find out why it's insufficient later on, and you'll see why we wrote the Scrum Guide Expansion Pack the way we did. It is insufficient, but he gave people a language to talk about strategy, because we've all read Rumelt and Mintzberg and all these usual suspects, and a lot of us would still be kind of scratching our head a little bit about what the hell is strategy. Although I did really like Rumelt's most recent book. What was the name of that book again? The recent one, Tom. You read it as well. We were comparing notes on it. The
The
crux.
crux.
Yeah, the crux. Yeah. So I quite like that. In fact, it all came together at the end of the book. So actually, in the September update, he had a thing. Was it the strategy foundry idea where we kind of get together and we kind of touch fists and we say we're committing to this and we're not going to kind of back away from it immediately after we leave the room, which is what happens in lots of organizations. So that was kind of nice. And a couple of ideas came together at the end nicely in the crux, which I'll probably introduce in September. But for now, I went with okay, you got your far off thingy, and Martin calls that your winning aspiration. What are you kind of going after? What's your life on Mars or whatever it is you're kind of going for, right? And then you have strategies, which are almost scale free because really you could have strategy almost at any level, right? You could be in a team of teams working on a product. So there's a product strategy. There's a strategy for like what are we focusing on in our product? And Tom helped me to understand there's a difference between an organizational strategy and a corporate strategy because you could have a big corporate with different divisions, or you could even have big corporate strategy, but then the HR department have a strategy to hire low cost people or something like that, something they like that. But people come up with all these kind of weird things. So you can have your far off winning aspiration. You got your strategy, which is in theory, uh, and then you might have some kind of near term horizon direction of travel. And then a lot of people use objectives and key results. I'm not a huge fan, I have to say. Um, and I give talks on how you can help those to be more coherent. I think the best lady to write about this was Christina Vodka. She wrote a book called Radical Focus, which I really, really liked. Although she went a bit too far. She said one objective, three key results, for the whole company, which is going to go down like a lead balloon in lots of places. But I have seen like I had a lady one day, she had six objectives and six key results. So basically she had 36 goals. You know what I mean? Is that focus? I don't think so. So people get a bit lost with that, and also with objectives and key results. What happens as well is people focus on outputs. Indeed, John Doerr, the guy who wrote the book Measure What Matters, he talks about the how a lot and outputs. Whereas the focus I'm going to go with here is more outcome oriented. And so you'd have some kind of objective, ideally a quarter or less. I could see how it could go longer. Key results usually within 30 days, and then you'd have smaller pieces worth that we can do kind of next week, which would be your hypothesis or deliverables that you would have. So it looks very nice, doesn't it? It's like some kind of hierarchy or something, but it's not as beautiful as that. We're going to talk about that later. It's a bit more messy than that, but this is how people think, isn't it, about how they narrowed things down? Would you agree, or have you seen other ways of people doing this? Maybe slightly different language. In Scrum they have a sprint goal and a product goal, for example. So you could have different depends what you're doing, evidence-based management, different frameworks out there, and so on.
Well, John, if you want to have a short conversation, I think we have seen it all right there, from anything at all
Yeah, I'm sure you
to
have. Yeah,
very
yeah,
proprietary
yeah,
ways of doing it. So I don't think
yeah,
there is a world
yeah. No need
standard
to.
for that.
Yeah. So I think you're all familiar with Cynefin, Dave Snowden's work. And I come up with a simplified diagram, but I think you're a bit of a more educated audience, so you're probably more familiar with this diagram, though the normal one. But basically, I like to show this to kind of newbies, where like the work is, we kind of know what we're doing, sunny, or it's maybe there's clouds in the sky kind of thing, but we kind of know what we're doing, get the right people together, they know what they're doing, they'll probably get it right first time if they do a little bit of research analysis, whatever, get together with the right people. And so really what we want to do over there is we want to kind of foster self-management. We want to make sure that the experts aren't being diluted by non-experts. I want people to just focus and get stuff done, really. And then in the more complex space, the more like product development type stuff, you got even if those experts get together, they probably don't know what to do the first time. They might need to decide what to do next, pretty much informed by what they learned from what they did last. And there's been loads of methods for doing this over the decades. Plan, do, study, act, inspect and adapt, build, measure, learn, pick your poison, but some kind of emergent cycle usually you wouldn't be planning if you're doing Scrum, for example, you wouldn't be planning if you're in sprint one, you wouldn't be saying, I know what I'm already doing in sprint 26. you wouldn't even know what you're doing in sprint one, like you're very uncertain about sprint two. So sprint 26 is like, yeah, whatever. And then of course chaos. Try to avoid chaos if we can, but there is also some kind of positive chaos. But this does um, mess up the storyline a little bit for us because our lovely little picture that we had a while ago doesn't quite work out like that. When you kind of go into that more messy, kind of entangled space in the complex space in Cynefin. Any questions so far or any comments?
Well, you
Okay.
probably don't want to get into an argument on this, but I don't think complex is predictable. So unpredictable needs to be both.
You see there's kind of a gap there. Looks like a pizza. There's kind of a line between complicated and complex. There is a kind of an area where you kind of don't really know where you are, kind of thing. Most of the work we do, I would say, is complicated. We'd have companies going out of business all over the place if everything was on the left hand side. Of course, we got lots of startups, so they are on the left hand side. Um, but yeah, the most organizations, that have a profit line, they're probably over 90% of the work is on the right hand side. So it's pretty straightforward. You get the right people together, they know what they're doing. Happy days, off you go. But the work that I kind of do is more on the left hand side, and some of it's on the threshold. So you're right, Martin, because even the Scrum people, for example, they say, "Oh, well, we got a product backlog. Oh, so you know what product you're building then, So like they know something. Yeah. Whereas if you're deeply complex, you mightn't even know what the product is. You mightn't even know how to serve the customer needs and things like that. So that's just kind of, I guess, the
John,
climate you're walking into.
I'd,
Go ahead, yeah,
I'd also say kind of the previous slide with
yeah,
your kind of nice six elements. I think that to me that does still apply to complexity. It's just, as you say, they're not nice hierarchical elements. It's more about how coherent they are,
yeah,
and it's a messy coherence.
exactly, Carl. Yeah, and you're the guy for that with your X matrix and taste and all that kind of stuff.
Right, I'm
Yeah,
going to say this. Yeah, this looks like a very very similar variation of taste. The same
yeah, yeah,
elements.
yeah. That's
Yeah,
right.
and
Yeah, that's
it's not
right.
a process. It's not a hierarchy. They're just different levels of granularity.
Yeah. And yeah, I like that word coherence. Yeah. You're kind of thinking about different things at the same time, aren't you? But you're not assuming that it's complete chaos, basically. Yeah. Yeah. So you know about that. And I think who here is a fan of Deming, Plan, Do, Study, Act, and all that? Tom used to go to the opera with Deming. Mike as well, Martin. Yeah, I think most of you were kind of nodding, saying, "Yeah, yeah, we know who he is." Yeah, okay. So this is a little bit of a kind of a adaptation on it because a lot of people say, "Oh, you only go through it. It's linear, and you kind of go like that." But actually, the kind of taking going here is you can kind of enter or exit at any time. So it's a bit of an adaptation on PDSA. And in the study piece, after you figured out what's going on, looking at the evidence and the observations and so on, you essentially have three decisions, don't you? Well, one decision of three options, maybe. Do you persevere what you're doing? Do you pivot or do you stop? And I find it very, very interesting that when people say, oh, we're going to use continuous flow, and by the way, I am one of the flow guys. I'm kind of a big event tomorrow, but talking about flow. But I get people saying, oh, we're just going to use flow, whatever. But what they do is they go like hamsters on the wheel and execution bias, sunk cost fallacy, whatever you want to call it, but they just keep going, even though the evidence is compelling. They shouldn't keep going where they're going. But it's kind of a human thing that I see over and over again. So I actually do like this idea in Scrum and Complexity and Evo, where you got this moment where you just kind of step back and just kind of say, "Are we sure this is the right problem to be focused on right now? Is this really the most valuable thing that we can go after next week?" I really like that kind of pause kind of idea. So just being intentional about this, I think, is important. But you could use whatever emergent cycle you wanted, really, including Carl's work, for example, which is a bit more detailed and has lots of practices you can apply as well. So are we okay with this one, Plan, Do, Study, Act? Any questions, comments on this? So what I tell people is if they're in the complex space and they don't know what to do, this is kind of my go-to kind of place, right? I know people use OODA and all that kind of stuff as well, but I found that there isn't really a kind of an agreement of what OODA means. And so I'm a bit nervous about it, even though I think I like lots of the concepts in there. And actually, the expansion pack for Scrum actually did talk about it in the last release, but I'm still not quite there yet. I think I'm more comfortable with an adapted PDSA or whatever merchant cycle you're comfortable with. So often what I do, this was an example from Tbilisi in Georgia, where I was sitting down with some executives and I explained Cynefin to them. And I explained to them that most of the business was on the right-hand side and life is good over there. But if even 5% of what they do is on the top left corner, they might need something called beyond budgeting, which I'm not really going to go much into beyond budgeting in this talk because that would take a bit more time. But essentially, you need to have some management principles, management processes, leadership principles that are more about, if you learn, for example, that your product isn't the right product to focus on, rather than everybody keeping their promises, because that's what we said we do to the board and all that kind of stuff. If we've learned that our promises are not good promises, maybe we should break those promises rather than keep bad ones, and just kind of go for new ones. So this idea that, instead of treating variance from budget, oh, Carl, you said you'd spend 100 million on product X, and Carl's learned that product X sucks. You know what I mean? But he's incentivized in the system to not say that. And even though Mike Forney might have actually come up with something worth $1 billion, the system is all set up treating any variance from Carl's plan as a problem rather than an opportunity, and ignoring Mike's opportunity. So looking into different ways, flexible funding, flexible in terms of procurement processes as well with vendors. So the vendors are kind of all lined up for that as well if you have vendors, and also that the people systems are kind of coherent as well with this kind of way of working. For example, you are all wonderful leaders, I'm sure. And you might tell me all lovely words like, John, transparency and trust and emergence and all these lovely things. And then I go back to my desk and I get an email from HR telling me I'm the worst employee in the whole company and I'll be fired next month if I don't pull up my socks. Am I going to be nice to all of you after that email? Do you think I'm going to be a good citizen and just going to suck it up and let myself get fired next month? Or do you think, what do you think is going to happen there? So we might need to change. It depends on how altruistic you are, of course. But for a lot of people, there's a lot of self-interest. And so what we want to do is we want to kind of tie in self-interest with the interest of the company, if you like. So beyond budgeting is probably the most coherent set of principles I've come across. You've probably heard of corporate rebels as well, but I think they're more for the cool kids. And I'm not convinced by Beta Codex. So what I like about beyond budgeting is they've been around for a while. But I was a bit worried that when I went to their conference, it was 95% finance people. It wasn't as broad as maybe I'd hoped it would be, because the hope from beyond budgeting for me is about coherence across the organization, not just in finance. So those of you who have been trained by Dave, he will talk about, he's actually not very happy with goals. You're going to this big place. He's more into like, you're going in that general direction. You're going for more stories like this and fewer stories like that. And actually, we're going to evolve from the present. This is where we are. We're going to kind of go in that direction. Kind of get below the politics line as well, where we're kind of dealing with more tactical stuff and kind of moving the needle a little bit. He's got some approaches as well, like S-Drive mapping, which I don't have content on, but he has some techniques where you can go there. But essentially, the key message is, don't be too married to some big goals in the sky. I still find utility in them as long as you frame them as this is a direction that we're going in. And if we learn actually we're going the wrong direction, we should pivot or stop, so that we're not kind of keep going for something that we don't maybe need to go for. So in other words, we're informed by result feedback. That's a good Tom Gilb expression. Our experiment results and marketplace changes, also side effects. Are we looking for side effects? Are we looking for things that some side effects are positive and some of them are maybe less positive? So similar to what we had earlier, like with that lovely kind of hierarchical kind of breakdown, you could kind of look at, where you're going that way as well. It's not as clear as that, of course, and we'll talk about that later. And the key thing is that we're generative about where we're going. That it's not just top down. There's also elements of bottom up. That we have our strategies informed by what's happening on the ground. And so the kind of basic DNA here that I'm suggesting is that you'd have plan, do, study, act pretty much at all levels. And you would be basically inspecting in terms of how you're progressing towards your general direction. And so you could have your winning aspiration off far in the sky. And what Tom taught me is you could have optional decomposition then into a strategy. And this is how Roger Martin frames it. Where do you want to play? How do you want to win? What are your capabilities and systems that need to be true? I love the last question, which he doesn't talk about so much, as what else must be true for this strategy to work? And actually, for a lot of people who are in the Scrum world, I get product owners coming to me, advanced product owners, and they tell me, "Oh, you haven't given me any strategies to say no." And actually, I have. All you need to do is if someone comes to you with a crazy idea, you just say, "What needs to be true for this idea to work?" Let's dream that I have infinite budget and infinite capability to deliver what you need. And let's imagine tomorrow it's there, it's on the table, and you can use it. What else needs to be true for you to get the value out of this? And you might find things like, we need to do business readiness. So the marketing department needs to do blah, blah, blah. Well, have you planned for that? No. Were you thinking of planning for that? No. So I could give this to you, and actually nothing will happen for it for maybe 9 months. Is that what you're saying? I think that's a nice way of checking in on how serious we are actually about what we're going after. That's one of the questions that I like from him. So we're trying to essentially inspire people. And really, we're in the business of more emergent strategy deployment. Carl, you'd be my go-to person on agile strategy deployment and emergent strategy and all that kind of stuff. But essentially looking at outcomes, you can see Tom's influence here. Who are our stakeholders? What do they value? What are their expectations? What are their limits? What are the trade-offs? And I would argue that even with a direction of travel, there is a lot of value in starting with who. Tom doesn't agree with me here, but I like the idea of start with who rather than start with why. And so who are those people? And then of those people, who do we worry about the most? And of those people, what do they worry about the most? What do they expect? And some things they're not even declaring with us. And what are their limits? I had a guy last week in a power company, and he said, in the control room, the screen is taking 45 seconds. I need to get it down to 3 seconds. I said, you don't need to get it down 3 seconds. He said, I do. That's my problem. I said, okay, so if we get it down to 3 seconds and it gives the wrong information, your stakeholder is going to be happy? No. So you can use things like Tom's impact estimation tables, for example. Look at the various values that they have, like accuracy of the information, to make the right decision, timeliness, all these security, usability, all these different things. And you could decompose your idea down into various options and then compare those options against those values and limits. And you'd see, okay, some of these things actually are giving us more bang for buck. And then I love Tom's credibility variable, which is where it's a kind of a scale of 0 to 1, where basically 0 is like someone kind of read it in the back of an airplane magazine and thinks it's going to be a great idea, but never tried it before, doesn't even know if it works. And then kind of 1 is like proven many times in our company, and then kind of a big range in between. So you might have some options that are actually looking very good, but actually when you apply the credibility variable, you might find that they're maybe not as attractive. That doesn't mean that you don't go after them, but you're kind of more forewarned, if you like, about what's happening. The key thing is collaboration. Go ahead, Mike. Yeah.
Yeah, on the collaboration bit, right?
Yeah.
Where is the feedback from the customer or data from the customer?
Yeah.
Because we know that many strategies fail because on paper they were perfect.
Yeah.
Then they were not checked before. So in this picture, where the customer need the real data,
yeah,
pay their
So when we talk about stakeholder, a lot of agile people think that we just mean internal politicians. But if you kind of look at the Tom side of the house, Tom Gill side of the house, it's like there's a broad set of stakeholders, including customer, user, decision maker, all sorts. And so when you're doing your plan, do, study, act from the top and from the bottom, you're going to be getting feedback, result feedback from these stakeholders. So it's assumed that that's going to be coming back in. So that's why we're not saying, yeah, it's like a Gantt chart, we're going to do this and then we do that. It's more like, okay, we're going to try this, but then what are we going to discover as a result of that? Good question. So you kind of take your bigger picture and you break that. You kind of have, you can say, okay, that's our bigger picture. We want to have life on Mars, but like maybe we can we just get a rocket to get to Mars, with people on board. We're not really too worried about. They all know it's a one-way journey anyway, but can we just get them there, kind of thing, So you could kind of break that down a bit, and again, you'd be learning from that, and that could be for if it's a big company, that could be for a division, it could be for a different part of the organization. You could also have some kind of direction of travel, or if you're in a product group, be kind of more like a product strategy, something that in your product, this is what we're going after. You can see this PDSA happening there as well, Mike, with the feedback from your stakeholders, which includes customers, users, and decision makers, and all these people. You could have parallel strategies going on. This is where it goes a bit pear-shaped, actually, but this is a reality where different departments will have their own little empires going. And I'm sure you've seen that in companies where they say, oh, we're all united at the corporate level, but actually they've got their own little kingdoms going on within each department sometimes. And I've actually, it's not unusual to see a marketing department that has work going on. 70% of the work in their department has got nothing to do with the corporate strategy. They just have their own little thing going on, because just so much money to spend. And there's basically plan, do, study, act happening at all levels. So the top level winning aspiration, your organizational strategy, your product strategy. And you need to be aligned, don't you, with different departments across your value streams, between the different areas and so on. And so you have to be very careful that we don't do like management by objectives reloaded, you know what I mean? Where we're kind of like, it's like a cascade down. It's more actually, no, it's informed, it's generative, it's coming from underneath and it's going across, and it's aligned, it's coherent. It makes sense. If I'm expecting to do some work next month and I need Carl to do something first, well, does Carl actually have that work planned? Oh, he doesn't. Well, maybe is that a really good idea for me to do work based on that? Is there a way I can break the dependency somehow? And I'm sure you've all seen this. I've seen it loads of times where you can have these lovely strategies, can't you? And you can have these value streams. Some people call them value streams. This is a real example on the left where I was working in a fast moving consumer goods company in Switzerland, and the marketing department was basically doing a denial of service attack on the other departments. If you're familiar with computer hacking, you fire lots of requests at a server to kill it, right? And marketing had so much money, they were basically killing logistics with work. And everyone had their own little kingdom going on. So the logistics people were kind of saying, yeah, we'll take your work, but actually they're their own thing going on, because in the logistics, their job was to keep the factories running at 95% utilization. So the marketing people weren't going to get those test windows, those 4-hour test windows. If they had any problems in operations during the week, that test window would just go out the window. So the work was just piling up. So you could see the cones kind of piling up in the logistics department. And so one of the things I like about the flight levels community, for example, but there are other ways of doing this as well, where basically you're trying to organize the work with a virtual organization, not necessarily reorganizing teams and so on, but basically getting people to have boards where they can see what's going on. I love what Jim Benson says. If you don't visualize the work, it's hard to manage it. And also I would say it's hard to manage the waste as well. And so at least if we can see what's going on across our value streams and departments and so on, at least now we're kind of more organized for flow, and we're not just having, Chinese walls between departments, and we're actually work is moving. But it's still not ideal. And my ideal world is what I call slice of cake teams. And Doesn't always happen, and the organizations aren't always ready for it. But essentially, I like cake. You can see I like eating cake just by looking at me. But you've probably heard of layer cake teams, back end, middleware, front end. And what's good about those teams is they know what they're doing, which is a lot of people talk those teams down, but actually they know what they're doing. So the back end people know what to do back end. And then what we do is so I'm not saying this is all Nirvana or anything. You flip it over and you say, okay, now we've got front end, back end, middleware in every team and all that kind of stuff. But actually, who's worried now about the back end and who's worried about the front end? And there's some nice ideas from some communities, like having mentors and communities to make sure we have coherence around that. But so it's not all sunshine and honey on the right hand side either. But we want to avoid the picture on the left. Let's put it that way. We want to make sure there's kind of so. I guess what I was saying to the Beyond Budgeting conferences is it's all very well for you kind of come up with your management principles and so on. But if you're prioritizing too much work to happen in the organization, because remember the very first slide, focus is deciding what not to work on. And if you're still putting more work in than the capacity of the organization, you are by definition really not prioritizing. For me, prioritizing is within the capacity of the organization. And I often oversimplify and I say, your throughput is your capacity. So whatever number of projects or products or features or whatever is you're counting, whatever the ranges of those, whatever you get done is probably what you should be bringing in. So in that same company, they were a project driven organization. They wanted to do 93 projects in Q1 of 2023. And I said, did we hire more people since last year? And he said, no. Did we get more agencies? I said, no. I said, well, you delivered 45 projects last year and 48 the year before and 35 the year before that. So I think you need to treat the, mid 30s to mid 40s as your range of how many you should bring in, not 90. And even for a guy who had very low appetite for agility, he understood that message. It is a bit oversimplified. Because we know some things are bigger than others and all that kind of stuff, but it's kind of a simple thing. So you keep breaking it down, and where I go a bit different here is with the objectives. If you use objectives, you don't have to use these, but they would be outcomes that you're trying to achieve in say the next 12 weeks or less. Kind of breaking down that product strategy into some kind of chunk you might get done in a quarter, but it doesn't have to be within a quarter. You could be more adaptive than that. And then within that, you have your key results, things you can achieve within 30 days. Again, outcomes, observable things that, a user is doing something different, or we're seeing more customers being acquired and things like that. And then you have your deliverables in between. And for all that level down, there's optional decomposition. You might decide actually just to do the first thing. You might not actually do a prioritization. You might just go for the first thing, but most people would decompose and then prioritize within those. But this is all a little bit too straightforward. There's obviously feedback at every level and so on. And this is kind of the bigger picture, kind of, in terms of how it decomposes. But essentially, this is what we need to kind of worry about. And so, is it really that linear? And it's not really that linear. I'd love if it was. And actually, there's a lot of messiness. And I love what Tom said about this is that you will have different stakeholders. They will have new stakeholders emerging. You'll have we're learning more about the strategy. The strategy is emerging because we're getting feedback from the ground from the customers, users, and decision makers, and so on. And it's like a heat-seeking missile. We're kind of trying to find where the next best thing is. And the stakeholders will change over time. Some new ones will emerge. Some will fade away. What they worry about will change, their expectations, their limits, and so on. And the only problem is it's a bit messy. So it's like, how do you do that? And I do like what Carl has. He's got this X matrix where you basically kind of keep an eye on all this on kind of one A3 pretty much. Isn't that right, Carl? And and that kind of keeps everything together, if you like. But it is quite messy. So if you have people thinking that it's all very chunky down and all that, it's not as straightforward as that. Any questions on this? Comments?
So maybe regarding the objectives, you mentioned that you try to limit them to 12 weeks.
Yeah.
especially in bigger organizations, at least here in Germany, we have a lot of grown 100 years old companies
Yeah.
with grown customer relationships, grown products, grown organization, and so
Yeah.
forth, and heavy products and overloaded products sometimes. And for them, achieving something in 3 months is not possible. Maybe in their dreams, but not at the moment from their capability perspective. And also
Yeah.
make a difference on the market. So achieve key results in 3 months
Yeah.
is like, whoa, we achieved maybe one or something like that.
Yeah.
And why do you limit these objectives to only 3 months? And with this messiness, I often use longer term objectives, for example, 1 year
Yeah.
to communicate, to make it consumable, the messiness of the strategy
Yeah.
universe.
Yeah. So there's two key words there, Florian, but I
Yeah.
didn't kind of draw attention to it. One of the words is ideally. So ideally, the context will matter and so on.
Okay.
And the other important word that I didn't draw attention to is quantified.
Mhm.
So when Tom was consulting, Tom, yeah, I'm just going to paraphrase one of your stories, and you correct me if I get this wrong. But basically, one of the last situations that he was in, when he was consulting, he went into Mr. CEO, was a guy, I think, and Tom asked his usual question, what's your most important project? And the CEO said, well, it's blah, blah, blah. I said, okay. Can you write down what's so important about that project? And so the CEO wrote down what's so important about it. Then Tom asked for the CEO to bring in the reports, the various officers, marketing officer, finance officer, all these kind of people. And Tom just confirmed, was that the most important project? And they all said yes, it was. And I'm not sure, was it the CEO or Tom who asked, but they were all asked to write down on a piece of paper, with Tom, yeah, what's so important about this project? And they all wrote down something different because we use weasel words, like better, you know. Give you a little tip actually. If you use LLMs, AI LLMs, one prompt that Tom gave me was when someone gives you some kind of objective or strategy or whatever it is, some kind of thing you're going after, just go into any LLM, because Tom's work has been around for decades, and just say, find the ambiguities in the following text, and then just paste the text in, but puts it saying using Tom Gilb style SQC, specification quality control. And it'll show you straight away, like all the holes in your text. And this was what Tom was pointing out. So when I was with that guy last week in this power company, I said, well, who are the stakeholders? And so we identified the internal politicians, the people in the regulators, and so on. We listed what they cared about, what their expectations were, what their limits were. We identified who the key stakeholders were and what the key expectations and limits for those stakeholders. We got a subset, and then we narrowed it down. We came up with I came up with the most important one, which was performance of that system in the control room. And so one of the things was about, the scale was, how quick is the response time for correct information coming on screen. And well, just for the information coming on screen. And so what Tom does with his language is he's got this kind of tagging language, if you like, and it's a wonderful prompting language as well. And basically what you can do is, for, let's say, response time, you could get the meter might be someone with a stopwatch. When someone in the control room actually hits the enter button, after putting the instruction, and then stopwatch again to see, and you do that like 40 times or something. What's the range of response times? And the current was 45 seconds. So we wrote down current 45 seconds, and it said, okay, what are we going after then? Well, we need to be 3 seconds. I said, well, actually, you because they already gave me context. I said, actually, the system was designed decades ago. So now they had to worry about wind and battery and all sorts of different nuclear, all things they didn't have to worry about before. So actually, the system is much more sophisticated now. So they'll probably never get it down to 3 seconds like the old system. So actually, that's probably a stretch. That's like something, pigs will fly kind of thing. So what's your real goal? And I said, actually, we'd probably be okay with less than 10 seconds. Okay. What would you tolerate? Probably tolerate probably target 15 seconds because they've only got 1 minute. If there's 15 seconds, they got 45 seconds to make a decision is the right thing, and then they can send the instructions to the power companies. And so just by doing that, they avoided over engineering and going for 3 seconds when maybe 3 seconds might cost them 100 million pounds. You know what I mean? Maybe there's a cheaper way. So I would urge you, Florian, to even if you are in a situation where everything feels like it takes forever, try to have the attitude, what could we do next week? Try to find a win. This is why kind of went from direction of travel to objective to key results, because the real thing isn't the experiments. What experiment can I do next week? Or what deliverable can I do next week that I can get some feedback on that might actually move the needle a little bit without spending that much money? And if you can show results already, you get a bit of momentum. Of course, I'd love if it was that easy, because even though something might be very logical, there's an art also to convincing people that this is a good idea, because they're so used to doing what they're doing. So it's not for the faint-hearted, but that's what I would do, Florian.
Thank you. Thank you, John.
I'm conscious of time. Will you show us also the text from the expansion guide?
Yes.
Sorry, expansion pack. I always get lost in D's and P's and E's.
That's okay. I'm just going to share my screen. Just give me a moment. Zoom kind of hides things. And
a little bit short of time, I thought what would be super useful if you would maybe help us to just orientate in like the structure you have built there.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm kind of just in this one weird situation where I'm trying to share my screen, but it's not showing it to me. So I'm just going to try once more. Yeah, I've got it now. So in the Scrum expansion, by the way, if you're not familiar with it, myself and another chap called Ralph Jochum got together with Jeff Sutherland, and we launched the Scrum Guide Extension Pack last month. We got a lot of noise for a few days. Quite offensive noise. But it's after calming down, and now the people are kind of getting excited. We can see the traffic building up, and it's an open source site. So if there's things wrong, people can join the conversation and they can submit requests and so on and make changes. We've already got, I think, over 13 changes we've agreed already for September. And we're open to ideas here as well. So you can join the discussion down here, but you just kind of read online. And in the document, we explain Scrum, we explain lots of things. But one of the things that we brought up was the whole idea of emergent strategy, basically. And so what we did was we looked at Roger's work. What we liked about Roger's work is that he gives a language that people understand. But Roger's work it doesn't kind of pass the test. If you start chipping away at it, it's not solid enough, because you can come up with all these weasel words and you can still have the wrong strategy. So what we did here was we did our best to coherently connect Tom's work with Roger Martin's work, but also there was a little sprinkle of Snowden in there as well. So it was a really difficult tightrope to walk, and that's probably why it doesn't read like perfect prose, because actually for me, my objective was, is Tom happy? Is Roger happy? Is Dave ever happy? But is Dave going to shoot me down for writing? When, as it turns out, Dave is okay with this text. He wrote to me 10 days after it was published. We took a bit of a risk publishing that. And so basically what you can see here is, you've got the questions from Martin. And then what we've done is you see here, iteratively quantify and manage stakeholder value. So iteratively being important. So Tom's work is really about like, what can we do next week to deliver value and make a difference? So you see so many systems where they're going to do these platform replacements and they're not going to see anything for 3 years, and they usually end up being unmitigated disasters. So this is much more about what can we do next week that kind of moves the needle and allows strategy to emerge, actually. Big emphasis on co-creating and prioritizing collaboratively, top down and bottom up. I'm personally a big fan of liberating structures. Anybody here heard of liberating structures? It's if you're not familiar with them, it's there's 33 of them. The new an Irish guy had to say that. English people have asked Irish people, go on, say 33, 33. Sorry, it's a little private joke between Irish and English people. But yeah, there's 33 different structures. And what's nice about liberating structures is everybody gets a voice. But you kind of have to do it in a setup where there's no meeting room tables and conference phones and things like that. You kind of do it in big open areas. I like open space, but one of the things I don't like about open space is it's a bit too open. And I've done loads of open spaces and I always kind of walk away and we're going to do this, we're going to do that, and then nobody does anything. You know what I mean? Whereas I find with liberating structures, we actually it's very purposeful, and you can actually, if you do it well, you can make a string of these things and you cling them all together. And I remember in my early days of doing different structures, I thought that I'd have to have a plan B and a plan C and a plan D and all that. You don't need it because they just really work very well. So you just need to be well practiced and pick a few. So doing that
Did you come
together,
across
yeah.
did you come across the work on open strategy?
I might have done, but I need to be reminded about it. Maybe you
Because
can
it
send me a
sounds
link. Yeah.
just listening to you, it sounds like that's what
Oh, yes,
you're
yes, yeah. The
stepping into.
Liberators. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I was informed by that. That's right. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah.
No, but there is really like a school of work called open strategy or strategy as a practice that looks at
Yeah.
strategy from an emergent perspective.
Yeah. I'm talking specifically about the Liberators. They have some strings for doing this for strategy, but I'll look up what you're saying later on. I'm not entirely sure, Martin, if we're talking about the same thing. And basically trying to enable emergence. So it's the whole thing is like that means one of the reasons, by the way, why Cynefin is explained in this document as well is people don't understand complexity. And for me, it's like 101. I mean, before I talk about adaptiveness, I need people to understand that, like, sometimes you don't know what you're going to do next. Yeah, you don't know what you're going to learn next. And so when they kind of get that, and Cynefin is a good way of like, explaining it. The only problem with Cynefin is it takes about an hour to explain it normally. So I try to do it in a very simple way, explain what Cynefin is. So, and when people understand that sometimes the work is complex, then everything is emerging really. And it's the key thing is going for outcome orientation. And so just trying to provide, there's so much advice out there about just delivering stuff. And even the word outcome is loaded as well. So you'll also notice in this document that outcome is explained. I've been in companies where they you say outcome, but in their head it's an output. You know, it's just automatic translation. It's we're speaking the same words, but we're talking about different things. And but the key thing is, and this is a key Roger Martin thing that I'm very grateful to him for saying this as well. I think he's got a video. I think it's had over 1 million views or something. You know, can we stop talking about strategy as a big collection of projects? Do you ever see these shopping lists? You know, where we have this and have that, and we're going to do this and we're going to do that, and they're not prioritizing within capacity. By the way, it's just a wish list. So that would be the ordinary way of doing it, and I would say this would be my ordinary way of working, and you know, essentially, I think it works in most situations that we come across. There will be some situations where it'll be a lot more complex and there's going to be some more messiness. It's going to be less structured. You'll still have structure, but less structure at the same time. And so you need to be open to the idea of not just doing one idea at a time, but actually maybe you're going to do parallel experiments. Because what happens in lots of companies, by the way, one of the reasons why we do parallel experiments is because when you do these experiments in these companies sometimes where they haven't really kind of moved yet, they think every experiment works. You know, they don't get that an experiment by definition means it mightn't actually work. You know, we're testing an idea. You might invalidate a hypothesis, but if you've only one idea, there's going to be a bias towards saying that that idea is okay. I even saw this in the Excel Arena in 2022 with 36 teams from UCL. They had no company politics to worry about. 36 teams. And it was about getting the best out of hybrid learning. And they decided to use Meta. Do you remember the goggles that never really took off? You know, the virtual reality thing, whatever. And they all said we're going to do that. And they did interviews. It was COVID, like, so they were interviewing each other, you know, in bubbles and all that kind of stuff. And there was compelling evidence that no one trusted Meta with the data, so they wouldn't use the bloody thing. Even young people wouldn't use it. But they kept persevering, even though it was the dumbest idea ever at the time, you know? They kept going. Only 2 teams out of 36 stopped, and one team merged into another team. So this is what I like about David Marquet. He says you got the red work and the blue work. The red work is you keep going like the hamster on the wheel. The blue work is you kind of step back every now and again and say, "Hang on a second, is this should we really be working on this? Are we what's the evidence telling us here? What are we observing? You know, kind of making decisions based on what so if you have parallel experiments, you know, you don't mind 1 or 2 experiments falling over and the other 2 kind of went ahead because, you know, you knew some of them might even be the opposite of each other. And really here having a climate as well where you're giving people time to think. Because one of the things I talk about when I explain Cynefin is in the complicated space, people need time to help each other. In the complex space, they need time to run these experiments and do rework because it won't work the first time. And in positive chaos, they need time to think so they can innovate. And so it's all time, time, time. So if you have an organization that's, trying to crack the whip on the team, they're not going to get the time to have creative exploration. And this is why, by the way, we have a lot of ideas when we walk the dog and, go first. You do some relaxation. It's like sorry to use the waterfall metaphor. It's kind of inappropriate here, but it's like a flood of ideas just come in, isn't it? But when you're working, it doesn't quite happen. So kind of creating the space for that. And so there's lots of options here. Parallel state-to-state experiment, fresh thinking. This is not just necessarily. This is more about kind of getting different thinking in the room. You might get experts from different walks of life. Look at educated hunches as well. Sense making. Dave Stone has this called sense maker, where you just kind of capture the narrative of what's going on and you kind of visualize it and let people interpret it themselves. And essentially, you're trying to kind of foster a garden, recultivate a garden, and see what's going to go really. And so that's the messiness here. But there's a health warning in here. You might have heard of the Cobra story from India. It's a fairly famous one. It was when the British were still there running India. And I think he was a governor or something like that. And there was loads of cobra snakes. And so he brought about this scheme where, if you brought in the tail of a snake, you get a financial reward, So it was very successful. It was so successful, people started breeding snakes so they could kill them, so they could get the financial reward. And then the governor copped on that, oh, this isn't working. So then there was no financial reward. So all the snakes were then released into the public, and they had far more snakes than ever. So this is known as the Cobra effect. So there's also something in this document as well about measurement as well, coherent measurement. I love what the flight levels people to say. They say when you're measuring something, you should also be looking for. If you have a metric, maybe you also need to have a counter metric. If you're going for speed, or how's the quality going, and things like that, and kind of tension between the measures, if you like. I'm kind of more of a fan of measuring, but also what's going on as well with the stakeholders. Are we really engaged with them? Marty Kagan, he doesn't. I don't agree with everything that he says, but one of the things I really love about him is that, we need to be getting out of the building and talking to people about what's really happening and not just kind of believing our own slides and all that kind of stuff and figuring out, what is the right thing to do next, actually? What's the next right thing? In fact, that's a kind of a metaphor from the Frozen 2 movie, isn't it? From Dave Stone. He says, what's the right next thing to do? And that's the space you're in when you kind of move over to the left-hand side of that Cynefin diagram that we saw earlier. But like Carl said, I still see utility in Roger Martin's work, Tom Gill's work, even on the left-hand side. I think it actually gives a structure, but you need to be aware that it's a bit more messy than that. Go ahead, Mike.
So I don't just want to monopolize, but there is a question that I've been asked many times, and I ask myself as well. We understand the value of this, and we might be aware for that specific organization this kind of approach might help and so on. And you mentioned the stakeholder. So how can we find the right people to talk about this and convince them that the way they did strategy so far or the approach they've used might be questioned? Is more like with example, because I don't think academia itself might work. Yeah. How can we convince them or to start and trial and experiment?
Yeah. I was actually asking Tom the same question only the other day. And I have my own ideas. And I'd love to hear some of your ideas as well. Some of my ideas would be I'm looking for someone who actually is showing some level of curiosity and who's going to have a conversation with me and who might create vibrations and convince other people. I think, Tom, the advice you gave me is find someone who really is, does want to get famous from great results and sees that we might be onto something here. I'd love to hear some of your ideas, folks. What have you tried? It's a great question, Mike.
I generally like to help people understand the power of learning from failure, or the power of learning from, getting results that you weren't expecting, and the
Yeah.
need for that. So there's a little exercise I do. So you give people a pattern, 248, and you say there's a rule behind that pattern. You've got to guess the rule, and you're going to guess that rule by proposing alternate patterns. So typically people kind of go 3, 6, 12, 4, 8, 16, because in their head they're kind of thinking it's double and double again.
Yeah.
And then you kind of say, yep, that conforms to the rule, but that's not the rule. So people kind of slowly people will start kind of going, well, 1, 2, 3, and eventually somebody will kind of go, well, 0, 0, 0, 1, 1, 1. So it's that intentionally just trying around the edges and getting
Yeah.
something that fails, that people get the insight and the learning and the information to figure out what the rule is.
Thank you, Carl. I really like that one. Might borrow that one. I think I saw you doing that at a conference before, actually.
Yeah, it's a nice conference exercise. There's a
Yeah.
New York Times link. I'm just trying to
Oh, yeah, I'd love
find
to see
it.
that. Yeah, thank you. Any other ideas, folks? What would you try if you wanted to try and inspire and see some kind of action around this? Because it all feels very logical, but how do you actually get people to do this? Any suggestions?
So, John, 2 minutes left. I had a little bit of a different question.
Yeah.
How can we best help you with this? I mean, what level of revision are you looking for? Is this going to be like a line by line commentary and you're perfectly happy, or might you even consider completely reconceptualizing this? Should something better emerge? Where are you in your thinking and
So the
editorial process?
most constructive way of, if you want this to improve, is to start a discussion, which you already have, Martin. And so on Scrum expansion, you've already started that. And I'm already studying your work, and Ralph is studying your work. He's on holidays this week. I'm on holidays next week. But over the month of July, we'll study your work and so on. And basically, we'll continue the discussion. If I go to the homepage here, there's lots of discussions in there. There's some translations going on and so on and so forth. And there's some discussions going on. And Martin's already raised one of these. We'll keep the discussion going during the month of July. Maybe we could have a follow-up session as well, Martin.
Yeah, absolutely. We already talked about this. So
Yeah.
I think this was more if you wanted
Yeah.
to share with everyone.
Yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
so,
So what we're finding is working really well is people are getting a bit antsy on GitHub and social media. But we find when we talk on a call, it kind of becomes a bit more human, and we kind of try to understand each other's perspectives and all that kind of stuff. So if you could give myself and Ralph time, Martin, to continue studying your work, and maybe mid-July again, we'll have another chat about what you've done, and then we'd like to hear your concrete suggestions on maybe some improvements, and then we'll have a debate about those. And if the conversation goes really well, you could even submit a pull request, and we could you could be a contributor to the document as well. So it's open source, so it's we're very open to feedback. But at the end of the day, as well, we do get ideas from lots of people, and when you write guides, there's one thing that I've learned from writing guides over the years. Often I say things, and I might say them a lot actually. When I write them down in a guide, I say, is that really true? And I find a lot of these things. I had a guy yesterday, a brilliant guy in the Kanban world, give me some feedback, and I asked him a question, and we realized that what he's saying wasn't really true. It's something that sounds great, but so we'll have to filter that as well. We'll have to cut through that as well. But that's kind of all part and parcel of it anyway. So what we need first of all is clarity of thinking, so we're all debating the same thing, that we're having the same, or arguing about the same thing, or debating the same thing. And that's already a great start, isn't it? Aligning on words and things like that. But we're very open to that, and as many people here contributing as you'd like.
Thank you. We're at the top of the hour.
Yeah.
I'm actually personally quite flexible if somebody wants to stay
Yeah, me too.
a little longer.
Yeah.
But we don't want to take anyone hostage in the process. So if you want to drop out, that's fine too.
Yeah, thank you very much for this hour. See you next time, hopefully.
Thank you, Florian.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
So, John, I had one more question, if it's okay.
Yeah.
I was a little bit wondering what's the sort of dynamics around strategy from a Scrum context. I mean, how do you work with the idea of strategy as an expansion to Scrum? What's the play?
Yeah. So you probably need to understand the backstory before I can kind of answer that.
Okay.
So the whole thing that kicked off the expansion pack, the whole thinking that got started was about a year ago, March 2024. I was in Melbourne, Australia. And I was with a few Scrum.org PSTs. And it was a nice small event. I prefer the smaller events because you can have more productive conversations and people aren't trying to show off and all that kind of stuff. And 4 or 5 of us end up in a room at a whiteboard. And we started looking at, I actually put up the topic, do we need policies for stakeholders? Because stakeholder was mentioned 14 times in the guide and it was never explained what a stakeholder is, what they do. And that's Tom's big space, of course. And so I was involved in the Scrum Hexes piece of work. So we wrote a card for stakeholder. Then we decided, well, we better describe leadership. Then we better describe a leader is someone who demonstrates leadership. We better explain what a leader is. And then we kind of, but in the background as well, for the last nearly 9 years, I've been researching organizational coherence around adaptiveness. And so there's another guide coming later this year, which is an executive guide. So basically what you see in the expansion pack is a subset of what's coming in the executive guide later in the year. Because in lots of organizations, there are no managers. They're using Socracy and all that kind of lovely stuff, and that's great. In most organizations, there are managers, and they don't really know what's expected of them. So we try to make that clear in the expansion pack. The reality is that in a lot of organizations, the middle managers are kind of running the day-to-day, and then the executives are dreaming stuff up, and they're forgetting about the stuff they started 5 years ago, and they're not aware that the organization is overheating from overwork and overwhelm. And so the concept of so basically there's a model like a pyramid, and one side of the pyramid, there's 5 sides in a pyramid, isn't there? There's 4 rectangles on the top, isn't there? I don't have one nearby, but anyway. So basically one of them is responsiveness. Are we responsive to market needs? Another one is to do with do we know how the work works and how the customer works? Kind of ties in with John Seddon's work. Then there's engagement, customers, people, and so on. And emergence was in there. And emergent strategy was in there. And actually consulted with Carl quite a lot, actually. That will be coming later this year, Carl. It's been lots of stuff going on there. Trying to see if did it settle and all that. But it seems to have settled, weirdly. And so if the executive guide is a completely different piece of work, and it's not just for Scrum people, it's for people in product management, all sorts of different ways of working. But there's so much talk about goals in Scrum. What are those goals contributing to? And Scrum.org came up with evidence-based management, that wasn't really going far enough, it was a bit fuzzy. It kind of went as far as you got a longer-term goal, and then you got your medium-term goal, and then you got your short-term goal, and that's about as far as they went. And we thought that, well, lots of companies do have strategy, but they misunderstand it. And lots of companies are using objectives and key results. And for a long time, by the way, until last year, I was basically treating them as evil things. But basically, I kind of flipped last year and I said, okay, can I help people to do them coherently? And that's kind of where I am now. And so it's about the jigsaw, how does it all fit together? Because when you talk to executives, if you can't explain how the team of team stuff is connecting to the product strategy, connecting to the organizational strategy, notwithstanding all the messiness and so on, and trying to keep it coherent, I don't. I think we're going to struggle to have successful Scrum adoptions if we're not connected with what else is going on in the organization. So I think it's a very important subject for that reason, and that was why we brought it in. There's probably lots of other things we could have talked about. We talked about behaviors, which is a bit of a weird one because it's kind of an easy thing for people to understand, but the executive guide kind of digs much deeper into that because behaviors comes from what you believe and the culture and all sorts of other things. So that's kind of almost like a result, really. But we just wanted to make people aware that there are models out there that might help them to hack a little bit while they're waiting for better advice. So one of the reasons why the executive content is coming is because myself and yourselves are all noticing that everybody's saying, read my book and everything will be fine. Join my community, join my pyramid scheme. You know what I mean? And everything will be great. And there is no universal truth, but I did notice 6 opportunities that are basically explained in the guide. And one of them is to do with emergence. It was one of the critical ones. Scrum also now better supports flow because the friction that was there with Kanban was removed. So if you did want to, you could do Scrum and Kanban. There's been a guide to do that since 2018, but there was still some friction there. So we removed the last piece of friction that we could see. Other people will still give out about the need for sprints and all that, but they think that it's just like a deadline instead of a time box to just check how things are going and stuff like that. You know what I mean? But I'm not trying to convince people, but if people are using Scrum, we just wanted them to be coherent with the organization. It's a bit of a long answer.
Thank you. We better start thinking about wrapping up.
Yeah.
And John, I look forward to another conversation later when it suits you. And
yeah,
happy to contribute any way I can.
Yeah, thank you so much. And yeah, anyone from the public can contribute and have discussions. If you see something going on, it's nice to kind of join another discussion on it and just have a chit chat and maybe arrange calls. We've even got doodles there as well where people could arrange calls with each other and arrange calls with myself and Ralph as well. So yeah, looking forward to seeing.
John, there was this explicit invitation from Jeff Sutherland himself, right, in the launch event, and said, contribute because this is from the community for the community.
Yeah.
And this is something that this could not have been done for the Scrum Guide, unfortunately, but this is what he wanted for it. So this maybe is an opportunity finally to contribute. But the guide is still that, right? There's no change to the Scrum Guide.
No, Scrum Guide is still Scrum. Yeah. However, in the September release for the expansion pack, it is a pack, so we can get away with breaking it into smaller documents. So, because we're getting feedback, it's too long, it's 50 pages, so we're saying, okay. So if you're only interested in Scrum, here's the Scrum bit, here's the strategy bit, here's the executive bit, here's the enterprise bit. Yeah. And they're all in there in that folder. For the translations, people can kind of keep it in one document. We're not going to make life complicated for them, but we're going to just make sure people can find what they're looking for, that they don't have to look at the whole store to find out a little piece of what they want, what they need to know.
Yeah. So in this meetup group, we managed to create a community of a few hundred people interested in the topic of agile strategy.
Yeah.
And I'm not aware of anything similar. So if in any way we can be useful for you as a sounding board, or if you want to air and share intermediate results, fronting a release or something like that, you are warmly welcome to use this group.
Yeah, there's just one thing you need to be aware of, Martin. I'm allergic to agile. Now that might sound a bit weird. Hang on a second. This guy just did a Scrum document a few weeks ago. He's doing a Kanban thing tomorrow. What is he talking about? The whole Agile Manifesto thing, and not just the manifesto, but what people call Agile these days, it's just lost all meaning. So for the last 3 years, I've been cutting out. I still haven't finished. It's even in one of my personal email addresses. I'm stuck with that now. But I talk about adaptiveness, effectiveness, timeliness, ambidexterity. It's a bit longer, a bit more complicated to explain. I don't mind talking about agility every now and again, but people might even misunderstand that.
I,
Yeah.
Friendly challenge. I have a wonderful friend who talked about Platon today, and he thinks that Platon has been misunderstood. And we actually ended up having this conversation that he has probably been understood for modern times in the context we saw ourselves being in industrialization. And I think we are now facing some other paradigms where going back to some of the basic might make us see it in a different way.
Yeah.
At my time in Nokia, we had problems with quality. Tom knows
Yeah.
some of those stories, and we talked a lot about bullshit back then. Then it
Yeah.
became reliability, maturity, and whatever. So we shaped a culture where you actually exhausted the meaning of a word and could never use it again because everybody hated it, and you had to then compensate by going into other words. So I like to challenge you that there's still some beauty in what we try to do.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Actually,
I was just going to say that actually, that there's still some good ideas, but just make you aware that association with agile for me is not a great thing for me. It's like, but I'm sure there's great ideas in the community though that I'm happy to chat about. Yeah,
we are still here for you if you want. And
of course.
Now even more proud that we convinced you to join us to talk about the Scrum Guide Extension Pack. Thank you so much.
Thank you too.
Bye bye,
everyone.